Hey, you. I've been talking, and I mean not talking on this YouTube channel. I'm always doing that. But I've been talking on Discord. That magical box of degeneracy that everyone seems to use for some reason. Um, I've been on this site for quite some time now, since 2017. Well, really 2016. Late 2016 was when I made my account. And I did so specifically to go on the Procrastinators Podcast fan Discord because I went on the subreddit at the time. The subreddit had like a few hundred members. There were like barely any people there because the podcast hadn't gotten very big at that point. And I see on the Reddit that there's a Discord server. Now, when I go in this server, there's like barely anybody there. There's a few people who post regularly. They're kind of known as I don't know, the head honchos of the fandom, or people who you would commonly recognize when you think PCP fandom, whatever that was at the time. And it felt very underground. It felt like there were very few people who were as deeply into this as they would need to be to speak so incessantly in this server. And I went in there, I said a few things, I introduced myself. It was kind of a cringeworthy introduction, to be honest. I remember getting screenshots of it when I went back into the Discord some time ago. I got a bunch of screenshots of it. I wish I kept those, but my computer either broke or I had to reinstall Linux or Windows on there or something. And the only records I have of that are in a chat that I'm now permabanned from. I was permabanned there like last year, so I'm probably never going to get those screenshots back, but I posted these really like cringy things in the server, and I thought it was kind of funny that, looking back on the way that I post back then compared to now, posted really cringy things. Um, and so I was thinking about how much it is that I began talking when I moved on from that initial cringe phase, because my first real friend, internet friend, that I had, who I was close with, and I mean close with, someone who I related to, not someone who I just spoke to because they commented on my videos, not someone who I just kind of tangentially knew. That someone who I liked but didn't really know very well, the way that I felt about a lot of the people um, who were commenting on my videos, or I became friends with on Facebook or something, in 2015. No, not someone like that. Not someone who I didn't really know very well, but I just kind of spoke to every now and again. Someone who I really got to know. Someone who was a close, very real friend. And I spoke to this guy. We had a six hour call. It's the first time we talked. Now, I had never really done an internet call up to that point, besides one or two of them on a personal basis. All of the other ones were for podcasts. I had been doing podcasts at that time with DZ Dog. I did the D-pad, which was kind of the only social interaction that I got. And I did consider, I still consider D a good friend, but I didn't know him in a close way. We just kind of spoke on the podcast, which was fun. Um, but this was the first person that I really felt I had a deep connection with, And so I wanted to speak to them all the time. It wasn't like with the D-pad where we just kind of spoke on live streams, or maybe we spoke once or twice on a personal basis. Before that point, I went into a Skype call with a bunch of these other YouTubers, and I heavily embarrassed myself. I still look back on that and I actually feel a little bit bad and get kind of upset when I think about it, because I choked up a lot and really did not know how to talk. Like I was I felt paralyzed in that conversation where I would start a sentence and then I would just stop because it felt like I was frozen. Um, And so when I remember back to that first real internet call that I did, it makes me kind of sad. But this one, this one was different because it was someone my own age who I felt like I could really connect with. So we talked for 6 hours, first conversation we ever had. And ever since then, we had kept typing to one another every now and again. We would, do a Skype call to make a podcast or something. We would speak pretty often. Um, but then I was added to this chat, this PCP fan group knockoff. I don't really know what it was. It was called the Chromasticators. Now, I spent 2 years in this friend group, more or less, and it meant something to me at the time. It meant a lot to me at the time. I did a big video. I did a big video on the Outlaws Cremation Furnace series. Those videos have been deleted off their channel at this point, but you can still find them in my playlist, because I re-uploaded them. But did this big video where it was kind of like a send-off. I was very, very sad. Specifically because there were certain members of that group who said some extremely fucked up things to me, like actually comparing me to real life abusers, like real life people who have done terrible things. They compared me to that type of person, or to literally those people, like specific examples of people within my own life who have done terrible things, said I was like, those people who had done really fucked up, physically violent things because I said, some kind of rude things and I had gotten mad. Because it's such a terrible thing to get angry and say something you didn't mean at the time. I guess I'm the same as someone who's, physically assaulted people. But that was what I was dealing with in the end. But before that, I had a really close relationship with these people. I cared a lot about them because I had never really had friends before. And that was kind of the point of that entire exit video, was I was saying I had never had friends. These guys were the first guys who I felt like understood me. And now in retrospect, I don't think I would ever be able to get along with those guys in the way that I did, not because of our personal issues that are very much, there, but because I think they're stupid. Like that succinct difference, where at the time I had so much energy to talk to people that I would be willing to talk in calls for 8 hours, literally 8 hours every single day, because I just had so much energy. And I would be willing to talk to almost anybody because I just allowed myself to understand them to such an extent that I had this almost naive hope about everyone who I spoke to, that they're a product of their circumstances and you just have to be a good friend to them and then they'll be not stupid and good. Most of the time, that isn't true. Most of the time, people don't end up being redeemable. And most of the time, it isn't worth your time because there's better things that you could be doing. Learning a skill, learning a trade, playing video games, doing something you enjoy, or just talking to better people. But at the time, my only interest was to speak to others. I didn't really care about YouTube at this time in the way that I used to. I didn't really care about video games because I couldn't really play them. And as time went on, my attention span actually worsened for consuming media because I was just doing calls so often that I felt fundamentally different after doing them for so long. Because when you're doing something every single day for 6, 8 hours a day for a year, you're going to change in the way that you think. That habit is going to be set in quite heavily. And when I stopped doing that, when I stopped feeling like that was something that I needed, like I just always needed to be speaking to people, like, the first thing that I would the first thing that I would be telling people was, if you ever need help, vent to me. I cannot imagine me saying something like that nowadays. Hell, I couldn't imagine me saying something like that when I was 13 or 14, but it was something I said at this time because I was just so excited by the mere concept of speaking to a human being. I was so excited by the fact that there are other people who have similar philosophical ideas and people who like similar things to me. Wow, what an amazing concept. People my own age, wow, what an amazing concept. And I was just so excited by it that, like, I became a fundamentally different being, than the person who I was. And I find myself relating way more to the kind of overt misanthropy that I would experience when I was 13, 12, 14, where I would be sitting in the lunchroom of the middle school and I would be thinking about how much I looked up to Light Yagame, you know? That sort of elitism isn't something I have now, but I can relate to the misanthropy. What I can't relate to is that incessant need to always be speaking to people when I first started out having really close friends on Discord. That feeling isn't something that I feel anymore. I have about 4 or 5 people who I really love and care about, but I don't talk to them every day. And to me in 2018, that would have been unthinkable. That would have been a radical idea. Like, what? What? You don't talk to this person who you care about every single day? I talk to people who I don't even care about every single day. Like, that that need to always be speaking to people feels so weird to me in the background. I know I say, ooh, it's so weird all the time when I'm talking about, the sort of the way I used to be or just like things about myself, but it is. That fundamental difference between having the energy to speak to people all the time and having so much optimism and hope that you're willing to just look over glaring flaws that you can see, you're just choosing not to pay attention to them. That, you know, it means enough for you to be speaking to another human being that you don't care about all of these criticism and critiques that, you know, someone like me now would have or someone like me before would have. It was a solid streak of just being a social being. And that feels wrong in retrospect. The fact that I can look at myself in the mirror and I can see a guy with messed up hair who has not left the house in quite some time now and who doesn't speak to people very often and who wears dirty clothes however often, doesn't brush his own teeth, just uses fucking mouthwash because he's too lazy, forgets to eat food because he's spending so much time on the computer. That is not who I would have been at that time. I would have looked at the misanthropy that an image like that represents, and I would have found it reprehensible. I would have said, it's against human nature. Human nature, this nebulous concept that doesn't really exist, but, we're going to say it does because it serves my specific ideological interests. It's human nature to always be speaking to people. Ooh, ooh, human nature. Ooh, I always have to have friends. If you need to vent, vent to me. I will help. That type of like obsessive, that type of of obsessive need to always be speaking to people, always making myself the center of attention. I wanted to make myself the center of attention so much that I would deliberately cause arguments and fights within the groups that I was in because I wanted people to look at me. Or I would start fights, now this is really fun, between other people so I could look like the mediator who was fixing the problems between people. That's how much I wanted to be paid attention to. That's how much energy, obsessive energy I had to speak to people. And I just fundamentally don't relate to that anymore. Not just the manipulative kind of gross elements of acting like that, but like just the fact that I'd be speaking to people so often. You know, I was in 2 calls today for about 1 hour each around that, and I felt extremely tired afterwards. It's nothing comparable to the person who was in a literal 9 hour call and then records a vlog about how they have too much energy after being in a 9 hour call, that they want to speak more. That was something I did. I said, I should just accept the fact that I always want to speak to people all the time. I think the person who said that, looking at me now, would have a stroke. They wouldn't know how to react to it. And I don't know if it's just the fact that the concept of the call or the concept of people in general has just weared on me, and I found it less interesting over time as maybe I've seen the true colors of certain people, or I've, just kind of gotten used to the feeling. Whatever it may be, if I saw who I was now, I'd freak out. I'd be like, how? How is that who I am? I thought this was all of what I was building towards. Because you gotta understand, the narrative that I had built in my head as an explanation for who I was at the time was like, my entire life has been leading to this, or human nature has been leading to this. When really, people are more nuanced than that. You can't just give one story that's an answer to all of your behaviors. It often twists and turns, and there's multiple causes for different things, and those causes can sometimes lead to other things. It isn't just a straight shooting where, there's just one black or white definition for who you are. It's very muddy, it's very murky, there's many different sides. And I think once you acknowledge that, it becomes a lot more easy, because you're not constantly trying to narrativize your life by saying, I am this way because of all of these experiences that I've just conveniently defined to serve that narrative. It's not that I think people shouldn't have stories to explain themselves. Psychoanalysis basically is that. It's deciding why you are this way. And if a specific analysis doesn't work, then you go to another conclusion. It's kind of the process of selection of trying to figure out why. You go through a bunch of different reasons until eventually you find the one that makes the most sense. But I was being so extreme with that I had just assumed that was always going to be the way that I was, which is always a naive thing. It's always a naive thing to say that this new change that you've made in the last year is going to define who you are forever. If you want to talk about consistency, you should be looking back to 10 years ago. You should be looking back, through the last 15 years. When I talk now on this channel about who I am, I'm always trying to pull from my entire life, not just experiences I had recently that I have a thought or a theory about that I think, I'm always going to be this way because I feel an emotion now. That's irrational. It's not based on logic, science, or reason. It's based on feeling. And I think once you realize that these kind of emotional biases can color your view of yourself and who you are, it becomes a lot easier to dissect something like that, where in retrospect, I know now that I'm not just a different person, but I know the reason for why I was like that most likely at the time was just because I was excited by it, and I never had those experiences before, that my personality kind of shifted. I had the same wants, the same needs, but because I was thrust into a situation where I had this social overstimulus, I kind of just went to town on it. there were aspects of my personality that are much, much more pronounced now, or just outright not there, that came out in that moment because I was responding to the right stimulus. And that stimulus, once you've experienced it so many times, doesn't do anything. And when people take shots of heroin or something similar to that, they tend to have to do more because the pleasurable feeling that they got isn't doing it for them anymore. They need to do more, more, more because it makes them feel good. Where when you get used to the feeling, the dopamine rush, as it were, it isn't a dopamine rush anymore because it's not a rare occurrence. That's why I don't think you should do any drug all the time because it's inherently going to lead you to want to do it more. And then when you want to do it more, the pain of having done it is going to vastly outweigh the pleasure that you once got. That's the thing about drugs, is that it's very, very pleasurable when you start, but then as you keep doing it, if you're irresponsible and you don't moderate yourself, you're going to ultimately be experiencing much, much more pain than pleasure. And now you're stuck doing it because you're addicted and you feel like it's the only thing you can do. And I think, it's a bit of a dramatic comparison to compare speaking to people to a drug addiction, but that's kind of what it felt like to me, where I was doing it all the time, that I got this overstimulus over time where it was just boring. It didn't have the same effect that it once had. And I think now I've just sort of reverted back to the self that I was, where I was never very interested in it. It was just, at that time, it was the new, amazing drug that was going to do all of these things for me, make me feel all these new things. But once they're not so new anymore, you just kind of go back to being uninterested and misanthropic the way that you were, the way that you were 3 years ago. And I find that shift in personality to be really interesting, not to come off as self-centered or, overly analytical of the self, but I had that thought sitting here looking at this Discord box that, seems so ever elusive to so many people. And the fact that, I'll go 5-6 days without speaking to anybody, my best friends, the people who I love speaking to the most, will say, "Hey, do you want to phone me up?" And I'll just say no. The fact that I'll talk to 2 people in one day and that'll be like an event, like, whew, I got to take the sweat off my head because that was a workout. It was like I just lifted 100 pounds. It's weird. It's weird to experience that contrast where, I'm not particularly sad, and I think the fact that I'm not sad is one of the main reasons that I don't speak to people all the time, because I'm just content doing this. Where when I got into my period of major, major depression, some of the most depression I've ever had, speaking to people actually made me feel more lonely, because I would speak to people to try and ignore the depression, to make it seem like it wasn't there. And yeah, for a few months that's going to work. But once you start trying to do it all the time, once it becomes desperation to where you really feel that there is no point in anything that you're doing, to such an extent that you want to off yourself every single day, when you're speaking to people, just to ignore that, it's not really going to work, because you're not enjoying it. You're not enjoying anything. And if you want to make yourself not feel lonely, the answer isn't to speak to more people. It's to do something you enjoy. Loneliness as a feeling is basically just sadness. And sadness, the way that you alleviate that is by doing things you like. If you're so sad that you can't enjoy anything that you normally like, that's depression, And there's going to be periods of that every now and again. Or maybe it's so chronic that you need some kind of medicine, or you need to reorient your life, do meditation or exercise or something, change your diet, like wait a couple years until something just miraculously changes the way it has for many people, or just find ways to cope with it. But that need, or supposed need, that idea that you do, that belief that you do need these things, I think is really misguided, because ultimately you're just going to keep going into more and more calls. You're just going to keep taking another shot of that heroin, and you're going to be feeling more pain afterwards, because it isn't really what you wanted. It's just what you're used to doing. It's what you feel like you should be doing because you've been doing it for so long that it's the only distraction that you can find from your real problems. And that was me for quite some time. That was the only distraction that I had. And I would be so bored and sad that I would deliberately start fights among my friends, people who I believed I cared about, that were the life and blood of my existence. I would just fight with them. I wouldn't enjoy fighting with them. I didn't want to fight with them, but I did it because I was bored and lonely and needed something to do. That kind of psychopathic mindset, I think, is really harmful. And ultimately, it comes out of this incessant need for people, or belief that you have that need. You should have close friends that you enjoy, people you care about, people you love. But when you're putting more and more people, more and more food down your throat just to ignore what it is that's going on, you're just going to experience more pain, because that isn't what you need. You need guidance, time alone to figure out what it is that you can do to fix this problem, or if it even can be fixed. The more distractions that you end up putting yourself through, the more you're not focusing on the core of the issue. And the core of the issue is really what matters. And a lot of the time, those distractions just don't work. And I don't know. I think that contrast is very, very strange. And I don't talk to people very often anymore. I haven't for quite a few months now. Don't feel the energy, and I don't really feel that obsessive need to anymore. I don't feel the same way. I feel more like I did for the majority of my life, I guess. And it only goes to show that phases and periods within your life are just that. The way that you feel, 1 year ago isn't always going to be the same as the way that you feel now. It's why something like, suicide is such a bad option for so many people, because you never really know how you're going to feel in a couple years. You could feel totally different. And if you let all of it go right there, then you just let go of the chance to feel better. Where, I kept talking to people again and again and again, people I did or didn't like. And in both cases, it didn't really do anything for me. But that thought of suicide was just always on my mind after a certain point, after the initial high of loving all of these people, genuinely loving them, genuinely always wanting to be around them, that I just kind of did it because I needed a distraction from the depression that I was feeling. And that idea that you're always going to be that way, which is what I believed, is really misguided, because you could feel like a totally different person in a few months or a few years. But you have to keep going to find that out. That I'm as misanthropic as I've always been, but I don't feel sad about that. It doesn't bother me. In some ways, I feel more, in some ways, I feel more energetic about being alone, because everything I want is here, and I'm enjoying that. It's not like, when I made that response to the Weiji and Nikeji video, where I was like, fuck this, I never have anything to do, I hate my life, and all this other stuff. Like, that person who was feeling that way has been, for so many months now, not there, that they could show up again at some point, possibly, but I always am going to know that it's not permanent, that there's so many different possibilities of ways that you can feel and things that can happen that if you just give everything up full sail, then you're not going to be able to know that. And I didn't really mean for this video to be about depression and these types of things, but I think that period in my life where I was talking to people all the time is so intrinsically tied to that because I saw it as almost a vice, something that I used to numb the pain with, when what you should really be focusing on is removing the source of the pain in the first place, taking care of yourself instead of taking care of other people with the veneer of hope that maybe it'll do something for you. You gotta worry about yourself first, you know? It should be obvious. It should be obvious that you should focus on what you can do to make yourself happy. This idea of loneliness isn't always going to be true. Sometimes the best cure to loneliness is a meal by yourself, a meal that you really like, something that's really special to you. And don't give up. You can be as misanthropic as I am, and you can still be happy about it. It's just a matter of trying to make it work, finding what specific things you have to do that cater to your needs. So that I've found, based on all of the different things that I've tried, what I need to do. And in some ways, I've experienced so much pain that it's difficult for me to experience that pain anymore. I've had so many traumatic, very real traumatic experiences. And I've had so many times where I just felt empty and sad that why would I feel that way anymore? Because I felt that way so many times that if I feel it now, I'm so used to it that it's not a big deal. And because I felt it so many times, it's rare that I do because it's not a big deal. And I think once you see it from that perspective, that as time goes on, it begins to heal because, as many calluses as you get, it's a sign of strength. As many muscles that get broken, the more they grow back stronger than they were before. And you shouldn't give up because of that. And I always think people should have the right to. I say this again and again and again. If you want to end your life, you should have total freedom to do that. Or, if you believe that there is just no way out, then, you should try as many things as you can before that point. But if nothing works, I really can't fault you for ending it, because that's your choice. You should have a right to that choice. Now, I'm not going to be sad if someone I know kills themselves, because the fact that I would be there saying you shouldn't do it for me is a very selfish action, because that's me putting my own emotional needs over theirs. And I don't think that's right. I think what's right is just to let people do what they want, to let people decide that the course of their life is over. And I don't know, maybe one day I'll decide that, maybe one day you'll decide that, but that's up to you. That's your choice. It doesn't mean anything regardless. And none of it really means anything. It's just a matter of making yourself enjoy, enjoy the life that you have while you have it. But if you don't want to have it, I really can't fault you. It's your choice. I'm not going to be sad when it's over for you, because that's not my place. Everyone's life ends at some point. Just because you choose to end it a bit faster isn't tragic. It's just what you've decided to do. There's really no reason to be afraid of death. It's just something that happens. It's normal. It happens to literally everybody. why would you be afraid of something like that, you know? And I think that that fear, you know, just allowing fear to keep you going is just going to make you feel more sad because you're so afraid of dying that you're forcing yourself to be alive. But the act of forcing yourself to be alive is living another day of being afraid of dying. And so that fear that's making you sad is also the thing that's keeping you alive. And so you're just being alive to be sad. It's far, far more empowering to make yourself feel proud of the fact that you've accepted the, you know, the abyss that you're going to go into, that you've accepted that death is just an inherent reality and that it really doesn't mean anything. It's just black. You're not experiencing pain, pleasure, or anything. Sight, sense, thought, all of it's removed. You can't be sad about the fact that you're dead because you're dead. Your consciousness is gone. Your brain functions aren't up there anymore. It's not going to be upsetting to you. And that's why I don't understand why people get so upset about people killing themselves, because they just chose to do it. You know, when you die, you're not going to give a fuck. They didn't give a fuck when they died. Why does it matter? They just chose to do it. Um, I don't really understand. Like, I don't know. I think people are very virtue signaling. They like, you know, they like these sort of moralisms of, you know, it's right because I say it's right, and you know, because I feel bad, you know, you have to keep on living. I think that's bullshit. I think people forcing themselves to be afraid just to stay alive is bullshit, and you should be less weak. You should just be stronger. You know, accept the existence for what it is, or just don't. You know, you can either see reality or you can choose not to. But if you see reality and the only way you're able to deal with it is by being scared of it, you should stop because you're being a coward, you know? And I think I think people should just live or not, you know? In my specific case, I lived long enough to see myself enjoy the life that I have here. And I also lived long enough to see that the specific trends in my life have changed drastically, and yet they've also stayed the same. When change was me going back to the way that I was however many years ago. But it felt like change because I had spent, you know, so many days just being completely obsessed with talking to people. And it's just a flow. It's just a flow of history. Things move and they keep moving. That's life. But if you get so caught up in the fact that things have moved, you're always going to be finding yourself looking into the past for things that are now gone. And as a result of looking into the past, you're going to be losing sight of what's right in front of you. This video is kind of abstract, and I touched on a lot of different topics, but I think it's representative of kind of my existential worldview. That really, none of this matters. And it shouldn't matter. It should be empowering that this doesn't matter. It should make you feel happier that it doesn't matter. Because as soon as you accept that, is, you know, I hate to bring up Sisyphus because I always bring up the myth of Sisyphus when I talk about this, but you know, when you're pushing that rock up against the hill, you know, up the hill rather, and you accept it, you accept that it's going to keep falling down, and ultimately you feel the pleasure of knowing that you've continued being alive by walking down the hill and then going back up. That in those moments you feel a bit of solace and you've accepted this existence that lies before you. It makes it a lot easier, but you have to accept the reality for what it is. Existential reasoning doesn't work for a lot of people. Trying to find meaning in meaninglessness doesn't do it. You know, Sartre, these types of guys didn't do it for a lot of people. It wasn't enough. And I think Camus is really good because of that. Now, when I read that book, it was like something kind of clicked. And I think ever since I've read that book, you know, I hate to tie it in like this, you know, to say, oh, I read the book, therefore I'm not depressed in the way that I used to. I really think it was a combination of things. My circumstances at home got a lot better, and circumstances in general online got better because I got over the fact that I lost a lot of friends and stuff. And I started to become more self aware. You know, all of these, it's not just one thing. As I said before, it's dangerous to assume that one linear thing is the cause. There's many different causes. Um, but I read the book around a time where that great existential dread was sort of fading away. And when I read the book, I felt different ever since then. Like, I've been unable to feel the sort of existential sadness and overt sadness that I felt for quite some time. Because reading that book kind of made me feel like I understood. Like I really understood what I had to do, was to accept the world for what it is and to understand what exactly all of this is on a material basis, to admit it, not give some sort of spiritual reasoning, not give some sort of existential reasoning, but to truly admit what it is. And I find that to be empowering. I find that to be really empowering once you accept that. Um, and I don't know, things change, I guess. This video is really fucking stupid.